Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where men share ideas to manage money, the home, and a life full of experiences with our partners. Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast. Today, we have in guest expert Ed Coambs, who's the incoming president of the Financial Therapy Association, and he is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He is a certified financial therapist level 1 and a certified financial planner. He is the author of the award-winning book, The Healthy Love and Money Way, written for readers who desire to learn how to cultivate more financial intimacy and joy in their relationships and their finances. Before we get to Ed, I want to chat with our co-hosts, Christian and Dr. Ross. Good to see you both.
Good to be here again.
Hey, Brian. Hey, Dr. Ross.
How's it going? Yeah, I know we were talking earlier, Christian, and we're talking about a disagreement you had with your wife, Chelsea. And I want to continue that conversation and really, I guess, how you approached that conflict.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot from you two, actually, but also just, living experience, I guess, about some successful approaches that I didn't necessarily use before that are bearing fruit, let's say. So the big tidbit that I want to share today that has been really useful, and Chelsea does this really well, and I'm starting to do this really well. If ever we're in a disagreement, whether it's about money or anything, if she or I are able to focus in on the other's behavior, that's the issue, the focus of the dispute, rather than attributing that behavior to the other person's character, then the conversation goes a lot more smoothly. Yeah, I don't necessarily want to get into the, specific disputes or anything, because the listeners don't need to know that. But that tidbit alone, just focusing in narrowly on whatever the behavior it is that is an issue, rather than you are irresponsible or you are, attributing something negative to the other person's character, that has made a world of difference. And how I approach and how we together approach these conversations. It's been a real boon.
Yeah, so you're not attacking their personality, who they are, their identity. It's just the behaviors that might be causing some of the conflict.
Yeah,
yours and hers.
For sure. Yeah, and that's true of any relationship, right? There are these, I don't know if it's pet peeves or ticky-tacky things that each person does that can really lead to irritation and what have you. Yeah, focusing in on those things rather than the person's character. Yeah.
So is there a way that you remind yourself of that when these disagreements come up?
Yeah. Another, I don't know where I learned this. It might have been from you two, honestly, again, but the idea that you are on a team together, you can force that with body language. So if you're in a dispute with someone, whether it's your partner or your friend or whatever, if you sit next to them, stand next to them rather than, face to face, you can reinforce this concept that we're working together. Let's focus in on whatever the focus of this dispute is. Let's resolve it together rather than, we're rams locking horns over this thing. That simple change to body language has been really, really helpful too. It's like a little cue to remind yourself, hey, we're on the same team here. We just got to work through some stuff.
Dr. Ross, have you experienced patterns or, kind of these ongoing choices that men make that make the conversations about potential disputes over money go well? What is it that they say or do, generally speaking, that builds momentum in the right way?
Well, a couple of things, or several things, and Christian just hit the nail on the head with a bunch of them. He's doing awesome there. And so, seeing yourself as a team, I think first and foremost is always going to be important. Remember, you're not arguing against each other. You're arguing with each other for the same common cause, to manage your finances effectively, or to run the household effectively, or, find the best life for the two of you. Right. So, Christian, you were right on the money. No pun intended there.
So if I can log off, I'm good.
Yeah, good.
What other tips would you add to, or what else should we add to our arsenal of tools in these,
Right. Well, I think thinking back in towards a lot of my clients, and I think when they first come in, there's this unwillingness to open up, to share. So being able to have that time where, as you said, you're sitting, you're facing each other, you're watching each other, you're monitoring each other, and be able to open up and be a little bit vulnerable, quite honestly, about how you're going to manage your money, how you're going to manage that conflict, whatever it may be. But remembering, as you're on the same team, then you're starting to share the stress. We know money can be a huge stressor, and that's what often causes the tension or the conflict, because we're getting stressed out about it. But being able to share that stress with your partner is going to overall reduce that burden. So again, going back and having that vulnerability to be able to just sit down and have a honest conversation, but knowing that we're on a team, we're on the same team through it all.
When my wife and I do this, the only time it's ever successful is when we sit down at a moment where we're not living that stress at that time. So we didn't get a bill and recognize that somebody overspent or whatever it may be. And then now we're reacting to it. And, you sit down in the living room, you're like, let's discuss this, and it just doesn't work. Trust me,
No.
I tried.
Well, the tension's already there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. So, and I know we've talked about money dates before, but it's just, for us, it's helped to, just to connect once a week, sit down. Usually we're in the office and just go through some things. And after you've been married for a while, it becomes, routine. It becomes easier, but at least you're, separated from, the emotion of that moment when there's something that occurs where there's a disagreement, which I think, now would be probably the ideal time to bring in Ed, who focuses on these types of disagreements at pretty significant stages in a relationship where they're at a deeper level. He focuses on financial intimacy, and he's a clinician. So welcome Ed. Thanks for joining us. He is. This podcast is brought to you by Modern Husbands. We are a community of devoted husbands of working spouses who share ideas to manage money, the house, and a life full of experiences. Visit modernhusbands.com to learn more. Ed, we're really thrilled that you could join us today.
Yeah, thanks, Brian and Bruce. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, good to have you, Ed.
So, like our co-host, Dr. Ross, you're a financial therapist. So, and by the way, I'm the incoming president of the Financial Therapy Association. And we have Dr. Bruce Ross, who was a past president of the Financial Therapy Association. So obviously, I'm going to leave most of this conversation to y'all. But before we go in too deeply, our listeners might not know what a financial therapist does. Could you start by sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I'm a couples therapist that specializes in financial therapy. And so I really look at through the lens of how are couples working around their finances. And, the big word that I like to introduce as quickly as I can with my couples is we're working towards building financial intimacy. And what I mean by that is creating the ability to be open, honest, and transparent with each other. So I just learned this new little acronym, HOT.
Hot?
HOT.
What does that mean?
Which is honest, open, and transparent. So I'm learning to say those words in that order because it fits the acronym. But as a financial therapist,
I like that.
I like it a lot, actually.
I like it too. I actually, was Googling, what was it? Financial infidelity. So you're asking me, what does a financial therapist do? Well, you're kind of getting a whimsical, meet gerrymandering definition here. But as a financial therapist, I'm really interested in people's relationship with money and what gets evoked for them psychologically. And when we think about psychology, we're thinking about thoughts, feelings, behaviors, relationship dynamics, our sense of self, our sense of meaning, right? Those are all areas that the field of psychology studies and tries to understand how they work, how they are interrelated with each other, and then how do we get them to come together in a way that allows us to feel a greater sense of well-being.
Interesting. Yeah. I really like the way you put that, Ed. And financial therapy is close to my heart, close to my passions as well. I'm interested to hear a little bit more though about like what ignited your passions to help couples, through all their very deep-seated challenges managing money together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, I think like any good therapist, this is a personal journey and a journey out of necessity. And so there's several different layers to that. One of them is, I'm married. I've been married for 15, coming up on 16 years. And at one level, certainly very fortunate to have married my wife, who's a dentist, and that's a great thing. But, and this is the modern man, modern husband, right? Podcast that we're going to be real about some stuff. I'm a modern dude, and yet I still got some incongruencies between what I say I value and believe and what I actually feel. What I mean by that is my wife's the breadwinner, and my value system as a modern husband and man would say, great, women can make as much money as they want, and it shouldn't matter to a man one bit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, man, it's evoked a crap ton of insecurity inside of me. And so financial therapy is an attempt to try to resolve that within me and within our dynamic. And I am fortunate my wife on the whole is very gracious about the difference in income potential up to this point in our lives. So that's one level, but it's also within my family. And I've had questions about, well, my brother and I, we've had very different income and education outcome differences as our life's gone on. So what's that about? Why was I more the saver and him more the spender? We came from the same family, right? There's things that happen in my wife's family that I'll hold private, but we're very painful around money, and it was confusing for me. Why is this going on? What's happening here? And so my original solution to financial pain and dissatisfaction was financial planning. Well, if I just know how money works, and if I can just accumulate enough money, then everything should be okay. If I just have a good financial plan, everything will be fine. I'll feel comfortable.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. And I held that belief for quite a long time, but so much so that I got my certified financial planner designation before becoming a therapist. And, in the years since becoming a therapist, realizing, okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's more complicated than that. People are more complicated than that.
I'm glad you shared that, because I've gone through, a similar struggle where I've been a breadwinner through, most of my career, and that's not the case very recently. And I decided to, take a career change to support my wife. I like, on one hand, like, I'm totally rooting for her, and it's awesome, when they're making great money, it's like, sweet. But it's right now, like, the way that that our relationship is structured is really more out of like family necessity, and ensuring that there's one of us that's always available to manage some of the challenges that families have. But I have to say, like, there was this part of me, it's almost dissipated, where I'm from this small rural town, and I'm not a misogynist, but I also know that my responsibility, or believed that my responsibility, was to take care of my spouse. And that that means a number of things, but part of that is probably through societal norms, is like to shoulder the responsibility of ensuring that there's financial security within the home, and that anything that she earns is just icing on the cake. And I fully recognize that that's not the appropriate way to look at it. But that was a real struggle for me to work through. Is that kind of how you've worked through it, and you see others doing the same?
Absolutely. And I think that that's part of the challenge and opportunity in this season in society, where the cultural values have shifted significantly, but the cultural values that you and I grew up under were still more on the traditional conventional side of things. And as little boys, we couldn't help but internalize that, both through direct family experience and through the larger cultural narrative, and by no choice of our own, right? That stuff, we don't get to filter out our cultural narrative, whatever it is that we grew up under. But what we do have to do as maturing adults is start to reflect on and recognize, where's the culture now? Where do I fit within that? And then how do I reconcile any discrepancies between what I internalized as a child and what I now believe as an adult? And that's easily said as I just rattle that all off. But okay, what do you actually do to change that? And that's the
Well,
harder question.
yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. And I want to stress how much we appreciate you being a Modern Husbands board member, as Dr. Ross is, obviously, because ultimately, I feel like we just need a community, and we need to embrace, the circumstances that we have, as it's really a blessing, I believe.
Yeah.
And like, there's this moment where we just have to look at the new paradigm and like ask ourselves, how can we be the best possible husband in this circumstance, and look at it kind of taking a step back, starting from scratch, and then moving forward. That's the only way that I've been able to kind of grapple with this.
Yeah, I think, and it's funny because when I say reflective process, I almost want to make this analogy that doing active reflection is like psychological bicep curls. Right?
Okay.
Right? Because therapists, we love to talk about reflecting and journaling, and it's like, yeah, but what's really happening there? And so what we know, though, from a neuroscience level, is when we actively and intentionally ask those types of questions about what does this mean to me? What is this change like for me? You have that internal dialogue. It's opening up new neural pathways for reflection and alternative ways of seeing things. And so that's the internal process, but we also need to have the external process of engaging with our spouse and talking with them about how is this going for them? What does this feel like for them? Being open to both the benefits and the challenges that they feel, right? Because, I was on a session earlier, and mom guilt, right? We have all these women now that are the breadwinners for their families. And so they feel that financial burden and load and responsibility. And they still have the internalized mom image of who they're supposed to be and all the things they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that's a breakable psychological load. Like that's, 5 plates on each side of the bench press bar. I mean,
right.
Come on, people. So there's a lot there as we go through this shift in psychological understanding of what it means to be a man and a woman, and a man and woman in relationship to each other. So it's not easy or smooth by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, while you're on the topic of what some of your clients are going through, and I realize that everybody's circumstances are different, but what are some of the common themes that you see when couples are fighting or arguing, or there's tension around money?
Hurt and rejection are probably the things that show up the most. Shame is often right in there in the mix. And so the topic of conflict around money can vary quite widely, but the process of conflict is very similar.
Okay, share. What does that mean?
Right. Whether we're talking about how much you're working to, how many hours you're working, which is connected to money, right? Like, or we're fighting about how going shopping and how long you're going to go spend, we're going to go spend shopping, or we're fighting about your savings, your spending. Yeah. Overspending. Sorry. You catch me kind of at the end of the long day. So if I blur my words, forgive me. But that process of what happens when we're going down the road together and we're having the same expectation about what's going to happen, but then you do something that's out of line with my expectation.
Oh, I understand. Okay.
Right. That really draws on our psychological resources of, am I pro-relational and feel secure in myself, and I can course correct and acknowledge and see where you're coming from, and then have a reasonable expectation that you're going to see where I'm coming from? Or am I going to turn adversarial? Oh, so you fucking don't care about me. Excuse my.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Right. I realize explicit content. So, but literally that's something that came up recently in a client session is, one partner said, well, I don't want to go shopping. Oh, well, you don't fucking care about me. All you want to do is go do that. And it's like, well, that's kind of bad faith in in assuming negative intent, as opposed to being able to say, oh, why don't you want to go shopping? Oh, well, it's because I have 3 other things that I need to do later this afternoon, and I had this time kind of planned to do that. But so at a much deeper psychological level, my clients, many of them have parts of their personality and sense of self that are insecure, right?
Okay.
They're prone to the fear of relational rejection. And so they see the world and most interactions around money and many other topics as a threat to the relationship and a sense of being rejected.
Oh,
would you say that's common?
Definitely in the clinical population, the people that are seeking counseling, for sure. And this is where the research and the science really does come in play. And one area of psychology is called attachment theory. And attachment theory is the lens of looking at human growth and development and how do we form a relationship roadmap in our mind about what relationships are like, and then what relationships are like when they don't work. Okay. And so if you grow up in an environment where your parents are in regular conflict, can't understand your emotional needs, minimize your emotional needs, invade on your emotional needs, relational needs, that's all setting up some difficult expectations for your later adult intimate relationship, when really what we want is someone to care about us, to understand us, to have empathy and compassion with us, to be there for us. I even do an intervention for a lot of clients that I work with. One partner travels, right? Mm. And at a logical, intellectual level, your partners come back home from the business trip. But at a deeper emotional, nurturing level, sometimes you don't fully feel their presence because they're busy whirling around, catching up on everything else. So they're physically home, but they're not psychologically home, and you haven't rebonded.
Yeah.
And so from an attachment perspective, we got to bypass the logical and go to the more emotional, relational connecting. And so I'll have them stop and look at each other and look each other in the eye and say, I'm home. I'm with you now. May even have them rest head on the partner's chest. And this can go either direction, or if it's same sex, doesn't matter. Because as a young child and an infant, when we're reconnecting and bonding, oftentimes our head goes to our caregiver's chest. And that has a much deeper regulatory and bonding effect than just saying, I'm home.
So, wow. And I could have used your advice 15 years ago. I mean, what you just said of being home, you get home, you're supposed to be home, but you're not really there. You're still in your work. You just described probably 15 years of our marriage, and I feel so guilty. And I've explained, I know that that's a problem, and we've worked through that. But that does create a lot of tension.
It does create a lot of tension. And that's the attachment theory really is so helpful for understanding those foundational human needs. And when we don't experience good coming and going in childhood between a parent being there consistently enough for us, it makes us feel more vulnerable later in adult life. And so that longing, that missing that other person, I talked with another person recently, not a client, but she was describing how she left for a retreat and her partner ended up going to the casino and gambling away thousands of dollars. And looking through the lens of attachment, they probably had some form of not a good goodbye and I will see you later. And so the anxiety of being separated from the partner, even if the logical brain said, yeah, she'll be home in 3 days because it's this retreat and not, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. That emotional attachment bonding part of themselves was fit to be tied.
Wow. That sounds just like someone else I know that I was just talking to, actually.
So, wow. In a lot of ways, the problems we're dealing with most of the problems I'm dealing with are not intellectual cognitive problems. They're emotional, relational problems.
So, yeah. So finances aren't just personal, they're emotional.
They're very emotional, and they're nervous system based, right? If we boil the brain down into 3 simple levels, and of course, any real neuroscientist would be like, oh, come on, it's more complicated than that. But okay, yes, of course it is. But for
we can keep it simple for Brian.
For Brian.
No. Let's be clear, for me.
Well, and really, honestly, for me, like when you're in distress, you don't need a complicated model of how the brain works to try to figure it out. You need a simple model to kind of help you like reorient to what's happening for me. And so the brain at the top level in the front forehead area is cognitive reflective part of our brain.
Is it like the pilot, like you're flying and that's your thinking part? Is that what that is?
Yeah. That's one way. Yeah, that's right. The neocortex, right? And so that part is great and good. But just underneath it, as you go deeper into the brain, is the limbic system, which is where all the emotional processing happens for the most part. And then at the base of the brain and coming out the bottom of your skull is the nervous system and the instinctual system. Now, the instinctual system, we don't have direct control and access over. And it's a darn good thing because it's supposed to keep us safe. Its primary question 24/7 is safe, not safe, safe, not safe, safe, not safe.
Yeah.
And it's perceiving all the time the level of safety in the environment. And then the limbic system is perceiving the relational availability of others, the emotional, that mid part of our brain. And then the cognitive, the prefrontal cortex, the pilot part is narrating the whole story of what's going on. But it's actually the slowest part of our brain. And yet it's the part of the brain we most often use to try to solve our problems.
Yeah, I've read that we really only tap into that part of our brain like 2%, 3% of the day.
Yeah.
And I guess, and my question for you, just to like really simplify this, and hopefully the listeners will like get a clear picture of how that relates to money, is if, let's say, that back part of your brain is ignited because something happened, something in the relationships, you've had a bad day and you came home, you got into a fight, whatever it may be. Now all of a sudden the pilot's not flying a plane and you crash, right?
Right.
And then because you have, money is basically this tool that we have access to, you just happen to crash with money.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important thing to remember is that money can take on every single meaning that humans can come up with.
Every single meaning.
There's not a meaning that you can't apply to money. Safety and survival, actualization, pleasure, fear, shame, all the emotions.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of one. Then yeah, I can.
Yeah, right. I mean, so
that's a great point.
And that's part of the challenge too, is that money for most of us takes on multiple different meanings, and sometimes meanings at odds with it themselves.
Okay.
Right. And so kind of in that, like, well, I don't want to be too greedy, but if I don't focus on being quote unquote greedy, then I might not be enjoying myself, which is pleasurable.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so we're always kind of in this Goldilocks of like trying to not be too much this way, but not too much the other way, and trying to find this golden mean of relating and being with money.
Right. So it sounds like this can be a really common thing then for people. So I guess for our listeners, like, what signs can they be on the lookout for, like, to identify if their issues are serious enough to come see a financial therapist like you?
I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but you guys told me I can't say everyone needs a financial therapist. So I would say 98% of us need a financial therapist.
Okay.
No, but it really, in a more practical sense, is, especially in the context of an intimate relationship, there's one big polarization. We'll take this as a walkaway. Either we completely avoid talking about money, or every time we talk about money, we end up sideways, angry, hurt, or resentful. Those are the extremes of the and so there's can be lesser degrees where, like, most of the time we avoid this topic or aspect of money. And so there's 6 major areas, at least from a financial planning standpoint, about money. And ideally a couple that's reasonably healthy can talk about this, all the topics under each of these 6 headers. So we're talking about cash flow and spending, investing, and then retirement accounts. That's 3 retirement accounts, taxes, insurance, and estate planning, right? That's financial planning, right? We try to look at all of those areas. And as a couple, ultimately, you're going to need to talk about all of those areas. Now, which area do you need to talk about the most? Probably your cash flow and spending.
Yeah.
That's the one that comes up the most. But, I worked with another couple recently, entrepreneurial. He had been entrepreneurial for a long time. She had corporate layoff. She's going in to start her own business. Guess who thinks he's the business expert? The entrepreneurial husband.
Yeah.
So he's telling, his partner all the things she should be doing with the money. Guess who's not loving his advice?
Yeah, I bet.
And now she's saying, no, I don't like it. I don't want to do it that way. This is what the accountant is saying for my type of business. Guess who's now feeling hurt and rejected?
Yeah, the husband's probably doesn't feel valued, right? Doesn't feel like he doesn't feel respected. That's tricky.
It's real tricky. And then now they file taxes, married filing separate.
Okay.
Which is not as tax efficient, but it's the way that they solve their money problem.
Okay.
Right. So, and in another kind of anecdotal story, I was at the pool for my son's 6th birthday, talking to one of the moms who happens to be an accountant. And I was telling her about my work, and she's like, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. I have a lot of partners that come in and they'll say, like, does my wife actually need to sign the taxes? And she's like, legally, yes. But what you do when you leave my office and how they come back is not my business. And she said she is amazed at how many people will not have their partner look at the tax form.
Is that primarily because of financial infidelity?
That may be one of it. I think that there's probably more financial fear, fear of rejection, misunderstanding, too many questions. Like, I don't know what to do with your questions. I've had some partners say, well, if they really knew how much money we made, they would spend us broke, right? So like there can be some reducing.
Sounds like a lack of trust then,
Well, there's a lot, but there's also based in reality. I mean, I've had, it's kind of like the problem gets more complicated, but it's basically like, and then being gender normative, I'm trying to make sure that it goes both ways. But I'm thinking of a husband who is in a sales job. And so he makes this much money, brings home the sales bonus. The wife then plans house project for sales bonus plus 10%. Then, okay, I go and make another sell. I'll just make more money to solve that problem. Next house project goes over, and it just keeps spiraling. So
the hedonic treadmill, except the guy's got to keep on working really hard.
Right. And so it's not as easy as just telling her to stop spending. And so, there's, I could talk about this for hours. Obviously, I love the topic. Yeah. And if it's interesting, listen to the next podcast.
You've written a book, you've written a book and you released it. What was it within the last year? I know that.
Yeah, within the last year. Yeah.
Great book.
Health, Love, and Money. Can you share a little bit about the book?
Yeah. The Healthy, Love, and Money Way is on Amazon. It's part self-help book and part my story of how I've gotten to where I'm at. Right. So I started as a professional firefighter. I started as average as it comes, and it's been a progressive journey. So I have a huge heart and huge compassion for folks. I know if I didn't go on the journey that I've been on, I would never be able to know or do so much of what I'm doing. And so it's a gift to be able to share that in the book.
And the introspection that you've done, all the work that you've done.
Yeah, that's been a big part. I mean, in full transparency, I've been in my own personal therapy off and on for 8 years. And, that's been a big part of doing the work and being able to do the work with folks. And so I'm not saying that everybody needs 8 years of therapy. That part of that was in the process of becoming a therapist. But, certainly if you spend a year or two in a therapist chair, you're going to come out different. Yeah. High likelihood it's going to be better.
You're supposed to.
I mean, if things are going halfway right, you may not arrive at Shangri-La, but you will be further along the continuum of well-being.
All right, let's give our listeners like something simple that they can walk away with, something that they can use in their relationship or show their friends how smart they are at a dinner party. Like, what's one thing that you want them to walk away with?
Other than buying your book.
Well, shoot. Now I really got to think about it. When you are not in a conflict with your partner over finances, when it's not active, invite your partner to look you in the eye, get eye contact with them and say, I love you and I want to work on our finances together. This may not be easy, but it will be worth it.
So when there's low emotion and the ability for high cognition, that's when you do it.
Right. When things are relatively safe and stable in your relationship, that's the time to start the conversation and acknowledge it, not when you're in the heat of it, because then you're more likely to be accusatory.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A big thanks from Dr. Ross, Christian, and myself to today's guest, and of course, our listeners. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to today's podcast. You can find our podcast on modernhusbands.com or anywhere you download your podcasts.